The dust swirled in golden clouds as Verna Harper clutched her youngest sister's trembling hand, watching her father climb atop the auction block with a whiskey bottle dangling from his calloused fingers. Durango, Colorado Territory, 1875, was not kind to motherless girls, especially with a father like Elijah Harper, a man whose cruelty had grown with each passing year since their mother's death. "Ladies and gentlemen of Durango," Elijah's voice boomed across the makeshift town square, his words slurring slightly as he gestured grandly to his 5 daughters lined up below him. "Today I offer you the finest bargain in the West, 5 healthy girls who can cook, clean, and make a man's house a home." Verna, at 22, stood protectively in front of her sisters. Ruth, 19, Bethany, 17, Margaret, 15, and little Sarah, barely 13. Though only Verna and Ruth were old enough to be legally sold as brides, their father had never concerned himself with such technicalities. "Father, please," Verna whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "Don't do this." Elijah's face darkened as he glanced down at his eldest daughter. "Shut your mouth, girl. You've been nothing but a burden since your mama died. It's time you all earned your keep." The crowd that had gathered was a mix of miners, farmers, and drifters, men whose eyes lingered too long on the younger girls. Verna felt sick to her stomach. They'd endured their father's drunken rages for years, but this was a new level of depravity. She had tried to take her sisters and flee in the night, but Elijah had caught them at the edge of town, dragging them back by their hair and locking them in the cellar for 3 days. "We'll start the bidding at $50 for the eldest," Elijah announced, pointing his bottle toward Verna. "She's a bit headstrong, but she can cook a meal that'll make your mouth water and sew finer than any store-bought clothes." The bidding began, voices calling out numbers that determined Verna's fate. She stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with the men who saw her as nothing more than property. As the price climbed to $75, a grizzled miner with tobacco-stained teeth grinned victoriously. "Going once, going twice," Elijah started. $100, a deep voice called from the back of the crowd. The townspeople parted as a tall figure stepped forward. Dust-covered boots, worn denim, and a weathered hat that shadowed piercing blue eyes. Verna recognized him instantly. Jackson Zimmerman, the quiet cowboy who occasionally delivered cattle to the neighboring ranch. He tipped his hat to her once at the general store, a small kindness in a world that offered few. Elijah's eyebrows shot up. $100 for the eldest, sold." His eyes gleamed with greed as he turned to Ruth. "Now, for this pretty little thing, $500, Jackson interrupted, his voice steady and clear as he stepped closer to the auction block. "For all 5 sisters." A murmur rippled through the crowd. $500 was a small fortune in Durango, enough to buy a decent parcel of land or a small herd of cattle. "Now see here," Elijah protested. "I could get more selling them separately." Jackson reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canvas pouch, emptying its contents onto the ground before Elijah. Gold coins and crumpled bills scattered at the drunk man's feet, clearly everything the cowboy possessed. $637, Jackson announced, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Every cent I have, for all the Harper girls, together." Verna's heart pounded in her chest. She'd never spoken more than a few words to Jackson Zimmerman, yet here he was, emptying his pockets for her and her sisters. Elijah's eyes widened at the sight of the money. Without hesitation, he scrambled down to gather the payment. "Deal," he mumbled, stuffing his pockets with the coins. "They're yours, cowboy." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed at the unexpected turn of events. Verna stood frozen, uncertain what fate awaited them now. Jackson approached slowly, removing his hat as he addressed the sisters. "Miss Verna," he said softly, "I have a homestead about 3 hours' ride from here. It's not much, but there's room for all of you. You'll have your own space, and I'll stay in the barn until—" He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Until you decide what you want to do, you'll be safe there." Ruth clutched Verna's arm. "How do we know we can trust him?" she whispered. It was a fair question. In their experience, men's kindness always came with conditions. Jackson seemed to read their thoughts. "I won't lay a hand on any of you, you have my word." He gestured to his wagon at the edge of the square. "I've got supplies loaded. If you want to come with me, I'll take you now, before your father drinks away that money and changes his mind." Verna studied the cowboy's face, the weathered lines around his eyes, the firm set of his jaw. There was something in his gaze that spoke of decency, a quality she'd seen little of in her life. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this?" Jackson's expression darkened briefly. "No man should sell his daughters, no girl should be bought." He looked away toward the distant mountains. "I had sisters once." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken pain. Verna made her decision. "Girls, gather your things," she instructed her sisters. "We're going with Mr. Zimmerman." Within the hour, they were headed northwest out of Durango. The 5 sisters crowded together in the back of Jackson's wagon among sacks of flour, sugar, and coffee provisions he'd purchased before the auction. Verna watched their father stumble into the saloon without a backward glance, the money already burning a hole in his pocket. "Will he come after us?" Bethany asked, voicing the fear they all shared. "He sold us fair and square," Verna replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "And Mr. Zimmerman has the legal right to take us wherever he pleases now." The reality of their situation settled heavily upon them. They had escaped one form of bondage, perhaps only to enter another. The journey to Jackson's homestead took them through rugged pine forests and across shallow streams. The cowboy drove the team steadily, occasionally pointing out landmarks or offering quiet explanations about the territory. As they traveled, Verna observed him. His movements were efficient, his words sparse but never harsh. When they stopped to water the horses, he helped each sister down from the wagon with respectful care, his hands never lingering. "How much further?" Margaret asked as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. "Just over that ridge," Jackson replied, pointing to a tree-lined hill ahead. "There's a small valley beyond it. That's where my place is." When they finally crested the ridge, Verna caught her breath. Below them lay a modest clearing nestled against the foothills of the San Juan Mountains. A sturdy log cabin sat near a clear running creek, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A small barn stood nearby with a corral containing several horses. Beyond that, a vegetable garden and a chicken coop completed the homestead. "Someone's there," Ruth noted, tensing beside Verna. Jackson nodded. "My neighbor, Mrs. Blackburn. I asked her to prepare the cabin for your arrival." As they approached, an elderly woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she smiled broadly as the wagon rolled to a stop. "There you are, Jackson," she called. "I was starting to worry." Jackson helped the sisters down from the wagon. "Mrs. Blackburn, these are the Harper sisters. Verna, Ruth, Bethany, Margaret, and Sarah." "My goodness, you girls must be exhausted, Mrs. Blackburn said, her kind eyes taking in their worn dresses and tired faces. "Come inside. I've made stew, and there's fresh bread too." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean. A large main room with a stone fireplace held a table, chairs, and a small sitting area. 2 doors led to separate bedrooms. "I've put fresh linens on the beds," Mrs. Blackburn explained. "The larger room has 3 beds for you younger girls." She nodded to Bethany, Margaret, and Sarah. and the smaller room has 2 for you older ones. Where will Mr. Zimmerman sleep?" Sarah asked innocently. "In the barn, child," Mrs. Blackburn answered, exchanging a glance with Jackson. "He's giving you girls the house." After a hearty meal, Mrs. Blackburn took her leave, promising to return in a few days to check on them. Jackson remained outside, tending to the horses and bringing in firewood. When he finally entered the cabin, the sisters had settled around the fire, their faces solemn and uncertain. "I'll be going to the barn now," he said, standing awkwardly by the door. "The door has a good, strong lock. You can bar it from inside." He paused, then added, "I meant what I said in town. You're free to stay as long as you like, or if you want to leave, I'll help you get wherever you want to go when I can afford it." "Why did you buy us?" Verna asked directly, needing to understand his motives. Jackson removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I rode into town this morning to sell my cattle. I was heading to buy supplies when I saw what was happening." His knuckles whitened around the brim of his hat. "I had 3 sisters once. Our parents died of fever when I was 16. I tried to keep us together, but times were hard. A man took advantage. He said he'd marry my oldest sister, care for all of us." His voice grew tight. "He sold them, all 3. I tracked them for 2 years but never found them." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Verna felt a tightness in her chest. "How old are you, Mr. Zimmerman?" she asked quietly. 28, he replied. "And please call me Jackson." "Well, Jackson," Verna said, rising to her feet, "we're grateful for what you did today, but you should know that we won't be separated. Whatever happens, we stay together." "That's why I bought all of you," he said simply. "No one should be torn from their family." With that, he nodded good night and left for the barn, leaving the sisters to process the day's events. That night, as Verna lay beside Ruth in the small bedroom, her sister whispered, "Do you think he's telling the truth? About his sisters, I mean." "I think so," Verna replied. "There's a sadness in him that seems real." "What happens now?" Ruth asked. "We belong to him legally." Verna stared into the darkness. "We take each day as it comes. We work hard, keep our wits about us, and look for opportunities. And we protect the younger girls no matter what." In the days that followed, a routine gradually emerged. Jackson worked from dawn until dusk, tending to his small herd of cattle, repairing fences and hunting game. The sisters took charge of the cabin, garden, and chicken coop. To Verna's surprise, Jackson never issued orders or demanded service. Instead, he asked politely if meals could be prepared at certain times and thanked them earnestly for any work they did. True to his word, he slept in the barn, only entering the cabin for meals or to discuss the day's work. He treated the younger girls with paternal kindness, teaching Sarah how to fish in the creek and showing Margaret how to predict the weather by watching the sky. A week into their stay, Verna approached Jackson as he chopped wood behind the barn. "We need to discuss our situation," she said firmly. Jackson set down his axe and wiped his brow. "What's on your mind, Miss Verna? You can't keep sleeping in the barn forever. Winter will come eventually," he shrugged. "I've weathered worse." "That's not my point," Verna continued. "This arrangement, it isn't proper and it isn't sustainable." "People will talk. Let them," Jackson replied. "I know what's right." "But legally, I purchased 5 women," he interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. "But that doesn't make it right. I don't own you, Verna. I never will, paper or no paper." Verna studied him, this enigmatic cowboy who had upended their lives. "Why did you really buy us, Jackson? The truth." He met her gaze steadily. "Because when I saw you standing there trying to shield your sisters from all those greedy eyes, I saw my Anna." His voice softened. "My eldest sister. She tried to protect the younger ones too. I failed her. I couldn't fail you." The sincerity in his words touched something deep within Verna. For the first time since their mother died, she felt the burden of responsibility lift slightly from her shoulders. Here was someone who understood what it meant to protect your own. "Thank you," she said simply. As summer progressed, the Harper sisters gradually settled into life at the homestead. Bethany, who had always had a way with plants, took charge of the vegetable garden, expanding it until it yielded more than enough for their needs. Margaret discovered a talent for working with the animals, especially the horses. Little Sarah flourished in the clean mountain air, her nightmares about their father's drunken rages becoming less frequent. Ruth, however, remained wary. "He's being kind now," she whispered to Verna one night as they prepared for bed. "But men change. Father wasn't always cruel." "Jackson isn't father," Verna replied, though she understood her sister's caution. In truth, Verna found herself watching Jackson more often than not. The way his shoulders moved as he worked the fields, the gentleness in his hands when he treated a wounded colt, the rare smile that transformed his serious face when Sarah made him laugh. He was a man of few words but consistent actions, and slowly, despite her best judgment, Verna began to trust him. One evening in late July, a thunderstorm rolled across the valley with unexpected ferocity. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and sending the younger girls scurrying to Verna for comfort. Rain pounded against the roof as lightning split the sky. "The horses," Margaret cried suddenly. "We didn't secure the corral gate properly. They'll bolt." Before Verna could respond, the cabin door flew open and Jackson rushed in, drenched to the bone. "The creek's rising fast," he said urgently. "We need to move to higher ground." "The barn," Verna suggested, already gathering blankets. Jackson shook his head. "Too close to the creek. There's a cave in the hillside about half a mile up. It's dry and safe. We need to go now." Within minutes, they were rushing through the downpour, Jackson carrying Sarah on his back, the other sisters huddled together behind him. The normally placid creek had transformed into a roaring torrent, water already spilling over its banks and reaching toward the cabin. When they reached the cave, Jackson quickly built a fire near the entrance, using dry wood that had been stored there previously. "I keep supplies here for emergencies," he explained, distributing blankets and jerky from a hidden cache. The sisters huddled around the fire, their wet clothes steaming in the heat. The storm continued to rage outside, but the cave remained dry and surprisingly warm. As the night wore on, the younger girls fell asleep, exhausted by fear and excitement. Verna sat beside Jackson at the cave entrance, watching the lightning illuminate the valley below. They could see the cabin, still standing but with water lapping at its foundation. "Will it be washed away?" she asked softly. "It's built solid," Jackson replied, "but there'll be damage to fix." He glanced at her. "Nothing we can't handle together." The simple inclusion warmed Verna more than the fire. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a future here, not as a purchased woman but as a partner in building something meaningful. "Tell me about your sisters," she said quietly, not wanting to wake the others. Jackson's face grew somber in the firelight. "Anna was the eldest, like you. Strong-willed and protective. Then came Mary, gentle and smart. Elizabeth was the youngest, always singing." He stared into the flames. "After our parents died, I tried to keep our farm going, but I was just a boy pretending to be a man. When James Holloway came with his fine clothes and promises, Anna saw our chance. He married her, said he'd give us all a home." His voice hardened. 2 months later, he sold Anna to a saloon owner in Santa Fe. Mary and Elizabeth were sent to separate households as servants. By the time I learned what happened, they were gone. I searched for years, found traces of Anna in Arizona, Mary in Texas, but the trail always went cold. Verna's heart ached for him. That's why you were so determined to keep us together, he nodded. Family is everything. It's all that matters in the end. Impulsively, Verna reached out and placed her hand over his. I'm sorry about your sisters, and I'm grateful for what you did for mine. Jackson looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm upward, interlacing their fingers. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. They sat in comfortable silence as the storm gradually subsided, their hands remaining linked until dawn broke over the valley. The flood had indeed spared the cabin, though the garden was destroyed and the chicken coop had been swept away. In the days that followed, they worked tirelessly to restore the homestead. Jackson taught the sisters how to repair the cabin's foundation, how to rebuild the chicken coop stronger than before, how to replant the garden with fall crops that might still yield before winter. Verna found herself working alongside Jackson more often, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools back and forth, their conversations growing longer and more personal. She learned about his time as a cavalry scout, about his dream of expanding the ranch someday, about his favorite books. He had a small collection that he'd been gradually purchasing whenever he went to town. You read? She'd asked, surprised. My mother was a school teacher before she married my father, he'd explained. She taught us all, said knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you. As August turned to September, Mrs. Blackburn began to visit more frequently, often bringing neighbors with her. People should know you girls are here proper and respectable, she explained to Verna. Stops the gossips. But Verna knew the visits served another purpose. The neighbors invariably brought eligible sons or brothers, men who smiled too broadly at Ruth and Bethany. Jackson would watch these interactions with a carefully neutral expression, never interfering but always present. After one such visit, when Ruth had seemed particularly charmed by a young blacksmith's son, Verna found Jackson alone in the barn, working with unusual intensity on mending a saddle. They'll want to leave eventually, he said without preamble. Ruth and the others, they'll want their own lives, their own families. Verna leaned against the barn door. Yes, probably. I won't stop them, he said firmly. When they're ready, I'll help them settle wherever they choose. I know you will, Verna replied, studying his downturned face. And what about me? Do you think I'll leave too? His hands stilled on the leather. Will you? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Verna thought of the way Jackson looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, the gentle care in his actions, the respect in his words. She thought of the growing warmth in her own heart whenever he was near. I don't know, she answered honestly. This place has become home quicker than I expected, but I'm still trying to understand what I am to you, Jackson. Am I a responsibility, a replacement for the sister you couldn't save? He set the saddle aside and stood, moving closer until they were just a few feet apart. You're Verna, he said simply. Strong, brave, kind Verna who deserves to choose her own path. And if my path leads me to stay here, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson's eyes darkened. Then I'd be the happiest man in Colorado territory. The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility. But before Verna could respond, Sarah's voice called from outside, breaking the spell. Jackson stepped back, and Verna turned away, her heart racing with emotions she wasn't ready to name. October brought the first frost, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Verna was hanging laundry when she spotted a familiar figure riding up the path to the homestead Sheriff Mills from Durango, her stomach clenched with dread. Jackson. She called urgently, and he emerged from the barn immediately, his expression changing when he saw the lawman. Sheriff Mills dismounted slowly, nodding to them both. Miss Harper, Mr. Zimmerman. What brings you out this way, Sheriff? Jackson asked, his voice carefully neutral as he moved to stand beside Verna. Got some news you both should hear, Mills replied. Elijah Harper's dead. Verna felt the world tilt slightly. Dead, she repeated. How? Bar fight in Silverton, the sheriff explained. Apparently he was bragging about selling his daughters for a small fortune. When someone called him a disgrace, he pulled a knife. Got himself shot by the barkeep. Verna wasn't sure what she felt, not grief, certainly, but a strange hollowness where anger had lived for so long. There's more, Mills continued. Before he died, he admitted to taking money from Zimmerman here but claimed he never legally sold you girls, said there was no bill of sale. Jackson tensed beside her. There was no paper signed, he admitted. It happened too fast, so legally. Verna began. Legally, you girls were never sold, the sheriff confirmed, which means you're not bound to stay here. You're free women. The news rippled through the homestead like a stone dropped in still water. That evening, the sisters gathered around the table, processing what this meant for their future. We could go anywhere, Ruth said, excitement coloring her voice. Denver maybe, or even back east. With what money? Margaret asked practically. I've been saving, Jackson said from his place by the fire. From what little I've made selling cattle. It's not much, but it could get you started somewhere new. The younger girls exchanged glances. But we like it here, Sarah protested. I don't want to leave. We need to think carefully, Verna cautioned. This is our chance to choose our own paths. Later, when the others had gone to bed, Verna found Jackson sitting on the porch steps, staring at the star-filled sky. She sat beside him, drawing her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. You knew, didn't you? She asked. That without a bill of sale, we were never legally yours. He nodded slowly. I suspected it wouldn't hold up if challenged, but it wasn't about ownership for me, Verna. It was about giving you safety until you could decide your own futures. And now we can, she said softly. Jackson turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the moonlight. What will you do? Verna had been asking herself the same question since the sheriff's departure. Ruth wants to go to Denver. She's got her heart set on a different life than this. Bethany too, I think. And the younger ones, they've found happiness here. I'd like them to finish growing up in one place with stability. They're welcome to stay, Jackson said immediately. All of you are. Verna took a deep breath. If they stay, I stay. They're my responsibility. They don't have to be, not anymore, Jackson said gently. You've carried that burden long enough. It's not just about responsibility now, Verna admitted. This place, you, she faltered, unused to expressing such feelings. These past months have changed me, Jackson. I've found peace here I never thought possible. He reached for her hand in the darkness. When I saw you that day in Durango, something inside me recognized you, not just as someone to save, but as someone who might someday save me back, from loneliness, from the ghosts of my past. Verna's heart thundered in her chest. I'm not your sister, Anna. I can't replace what you lost. I've never seen you as a replacement, Verna. You're nothing like Anna. You're you stubborn, proud, fierce Verna Harper, who scowls when I track mud into the cabin and smiles when she thinks I'm not looking. Despite herself, Verna smiled. I do not. You're doing it now, he pointed out, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Jackson, she said seriously, what are you asking me? He shifted to face her fully. I'm asking you to stay. Not as someone I purchased, not as a housekeeper, but as a woman who chooses to be here. With me. I'm asking for a chance to court you properly, to build something together. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. For so long, she'd focused solely on survival, hers and her sister's. The possibility of happiness, of love, had seemed as distant as the stars above. I need time, she said honestly, to help the girls decide their paths, to be certain of my own heart. Jackson nodded, disappointment and understanding mingling in his expression. "I've waited my whole life to find someone like you, Verna Harper. I can wait a while longer." Winter descended on the Colorado mountains with breathtaking swiftness. Snow blanketed the valley, transforming the homestead into a scene from a fairy tale. Inside the cabin, life continued with new purpose. After much discussion, decisions had been made. Ruth and Bethany would leave for Denver in the spring, with enough money from Jackson to establish themselves comfortably. Margaret, Sarah, and Verna would remain at the homestead. What had not been decided, at least not openly, was the nature of Verna and Jackson's relationship. Since their conversation on the porch, Jackson had been careful to maintain a respectful distance, though Verna often caught him watching her with undisguised longing. As Christmas approached, Jackson rode into the nearest town for supplies, returning with gifts for each of the sisters, fabric for new dresses, books, hair ribbons, and a small wooden horse he'd carved himself for Sarah. For Verna, he brought a journal bound in soft leather. "I noticed you writing sometimes, on scraps of paper," he explained as she ran her fingers over the cover. "Thought you might like something proper to keep your thoughts in." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. That night, she wrote her first entry. "I never expected to find safety in the hands of a man who purchased me. I never expected to find home in a place I was brought to against my will. Yet here I am, watching snow fall outside the window of a cabin that has become more home to me than anywhere I've lived before." Jackson Zimmerman saved us that day in Durango, but what he couldn't have known was that, in doing so, he may have saved himself as well. Christmas Eve brought a surprise blizzard that confined them all to the cabin. They made the best of it, cooking a festive meal together and singing carols around the fire. When the younger girls finally retired to bed, Jackson produced a small bottle of blackberry wine. "Mrs. Blackburn's recipe," he explained, pouring 2 small glasses. "She says it's medicinal." Verna laughed, accepting the glass and settling beside him on the bench near the fire. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling of flames and the howling wind outside. "Your first Christmas here," Jackson observed, his voice low. "Is it very different from what you're used to?" Verna sipped the sweet wine. "Father was usually too drunk to notice holidays. The last good Christmas I remember was when Mother was still alive. I was 12. She stared into the fire. "I've tried to make it special for the girls each year, but it was never easy." "You've done an amazing job with them," Jackson said sincerely. "They're extraordinary young women." "They are," Verna agreed proudly. "And they're going to have the chances I never had." Jackson studied her in the firelight. "What chances did you want, Verna? What dreams did you have before life got in the way?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before. "I wanted to teach," she admitted, "like your mother did. I used to sneak books whenever I could, teaching myself and then the girls." "You still could," Jackson suggested. "The valley's growing, more families settling. They'll need a school eventually." The thought kindled excitement in Verna's chest. "Do you really think so?" "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," he replied simply. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams that had long been buried under the weight of responsibilities. When Verna finally rose to go to bed, Jackson caught her hand gently. "I have one more gift for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Curious, Verna unwrapped it, revealing a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening it to find it empty. "But I can't accept something so fine." "It was my mother's," Jackson explained. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart." His eyes met hers steadily. "That's you, Verna. It has been since the moment I saw you standing tall despite everything, protecting your sisters." Verna's throat tightened with emotion. "Jackson, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "Just keep it. Fill it with whatever memories matter most to you." Impulsively, Verna leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin, feeling him shiver slightly at her touch. When she pulled back, his eyes had darkened, and he reached up to touch the spot where her lips had been, as if preserving the sensation. Without another word, Verna retreated to her bedroom, her heart racing and the silver locket clutched tightly in her hand. Spring brought change to the valley. As the snow melted and wildflowers began to dot the meadows, preparations were made for Ruth and Bethany's departure. Jackson arranged for them to travel with a trusted friend who was heading to Denver, and he spent days making sure their wagon was sturdy and well supplied. The morning of their departure was emotional. Sarah clung to her sisters, begging them not to go. Margaret maintained a brave face, but her eyes were red-rimmed. Verna hugged Ruth fiercely. "Write to us," she instructed. "Every week. And if you need anything, we'll be fine," Ruth assured her, wiping away tears. "You taught us to be strong, Verna." Bethany embraced Jackson, surprising him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving us our lives back." As they watched the wagon disappear down the valley, Jackson stood beside Verna, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "They'll be all right," he said softly. "I know," Verna replied, reaching for his hand and twining her fingers through his. "We all will be." That evening, after Margaret and Sarah had gone to bed, Verna found Jackson on the porch. Without a word, she sat beside him, closer than usual, their shoulders touching. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "I've been responsible for them for so long. Now Ruth and Bethany are gone, and Margaret and Sarah are growing up so fast." "You'll always be their sister," Jackson observed, "but maybe now you can be something else too, whatever you want to be." Verna turned to look at him, taking in his profile against the darkening sky. "I know what I want to be, Jackson." He met her gaze, hope and caution warring in his expression. "What's that?" Verna reached up to touch the locket that now hung around her neck. "Yours," she said simply. "If you'll have me." The word hung between them for a heartbeat before Jackson's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Are you sure? I need you to be sure, Verna." "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. "I love you, Jackson Zimmerman. Not because you saved us, but because of the man you've shown yourself to be every day since. Patient, kind, honorable." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, sending sparks through her body. "I've loved you since the first moment I saw you," he confessed. "I didn't know it then, but my heart did." When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home. His kiss was gentle at first, reverent, but deepened as Verna's arms wound around his neck. Years of loneliness and fear melted away in the warmth of their embrace, replaced by hope and possibility. "Marry me," Jackson whispered against her lips. "Build a life with me here in this valley." "Yes," Verna answered without hesitation. Yes, they were married in May beneath a canopy of blooming apple trees that Jackson had planted years earlier. Mrs. Blackburn hosted the celebration, and neighbors from miles around came to witness the union. Margaret served as Verna's maid of honor, and Sarah scattered wildflower petals along the path. Ruth and Bethany couldn't return for the ceremony, but they sent a telegram with their blessings and news of their own successes in Denver, Ruth working as a shopkeeper's assistant, and Bethany apprenticed to a dressmaker. That night, as Jackson carried Verna across the threshold of the cabin, now their home in every sense, she felt a completeness she had never known possible. The cabin had been transformed in preparation for their marriage. The main room remained largely the same, but Jackson had built an addition, a private bedroom for them, separated from the room the younger girls still shared. "It's perfect," Verna said, taking in the simple but beautiful space. A new quilt covered the bed, and wildflowers filled a vase on the bedside table. "It's just the beginning," Jackson promised, setting her gently on her feet. "I want to build a life worthy of you, Verna." "We'll build it together," she replied, reaching up to unpin her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. "That's what partners do." As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, the homestead flourished under their joint care. True to his word, Jackson helped Verna establish a small school in their home, teaching the children of neighboring ranches 3 days a week. Margaret revealed a talent for medicine, apprenticing with the doctor in the nearest town. Sarah grew into a confident young woman with a gift for storytelling. Letters arrived regularly from Ruth and Bethany, each one sharing new adventures and achievements. Ruth had met a kind shopkeeper and was being courted properly. Bethany had designs featured in a Denver dress shop window. One crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after the sheriff had brought news of their father's death, Verna and Jackson sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. Verna's head rested on Jackson's shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "I was thinking," she said, breaking their comfortable silence, "about names." Jackson glanced down at her, a question in his eyes. Verna took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "For the baby, if it's a boy, perhaps William, after your father." Jackson's eyes widened, his hand spreading protectively over the slight swell hidden beneath her dress. "A baby," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You're sure?" Verna nodded, smiling up at him. "Dr. Callahan confirmed it yesterday. We're having a child, Jackson." With a sound of pure joy, Jackson gathered her in his arms, burying his face in her hair. "A family," he murmured. "Our family." "It already was," Verna reminded him gently. "Margaret, Sarah, even Ruth and Bethany, you made us a family when you couldn't bear to see us separated." "And now we're adding to it," Jackson said wonderingly. "A child of our own." As darkness fell over the valley, they remained entwined on the porch, planning and dreaming. Jackson spoke of expanding the cabin again, of the things he would teach their child: riding, fishing, reading the stars. Verna imagined tiny hands and bedtime stories, a mixture of fear and excitement brewing within her. "Are you happy, Verna?" Jackson asked suddenly, his voice serious. "Truly happy, no regrets." Verna turned in his arms to face him fully. "My only regret is that it took me so long to recognize what was right in front of me. You gave me and my sisters freedom when you bought us, Jackson, but I found something even more precious in choosing to stay." "What's that?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Love," she said simply. "The kind that builds rather than breaks, the kind that heals old wounds and plants seeds for the future." She placed her hand over his, still resting on her stomach. "The kind that creates miracles." Their child was born the following spring, a healthy boy with Jackson's blue eyes and Verna's determined spirit. They named him William, after Jackson's father, with Thomas as a middle name, honoring Verna's grandfather. Margaret proved invaluable during the birth, her medical training helping to ease Verna through a difficult labor. As William grew, so did their family's happiness. The homestead expanded to include a proper schoolhouse, where Verna taught not only the neighboring children, but also adults eager to learn to read and write. Jackson's cattle business prospered, allowing them to purchase additional land and hire help during busy seasons. Sarah, at 18, surprised them all by announcing her engagement to the son of a rancher from the next valley. "He loves my stories," she told Verna with shining eyes. "Says I should write them down for others to read." Ruth eventually married her Denver shopkeeper, a kind-hearted widower with a young daughter who quickly became the sister Ruth had missed. Bethany's designs gained enough recognition that she opened her own small shop, specializing in practical but beautiful clothing for frontier women. 5 years after William's birth, Verna gave birth to twin girls they named Anna and Mary in honor of Jackson's lost sisters. As he held his daughters for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, Jackson whispered, "They would have loved you, Verna. All of you." On the twins' first birthday, an unexpected letter arrived from Texas. Jackson read it with trembling hands, then passed it wordlessly to Verna. It was from Elizabeth, his youngest sister, found at last after years of searching. She was alive, married to a cattle rancher outside of Austin with children of her own. "She wants to visit," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wants to meet you and the children." When Elizabeth finally arrived that summer, the reunion was everything Jackson had dreamed of and more. The siblings embraced, weeping and laughing by turns. Elizabeth, a petite woman with Jackson's same blue eyes, brought her husband and 3 children, filling the homestead with joyful noise. "I never stopped looking for you," Jackson told her as they sat beneath the apple trees watching their children play together. "All these years." "I know," Elizabeth replied, squeezing his hand. "I searched for you too when I could. Anna found me first, just before she died." Jackson's breath caught. "Anna, she's gone," Elizabeth nodded sadly. 5 years ago, consumption. But she died free, Jackson. She escaped that saloon, made her way to California. She had a good life there in the end." "And Mary?" Jackson asked, his voice barely audible. "Still missing," Elizabeth admitted. "But don't lose hope. Look at us together again after all this time." That night, as Verna and Jackson lay in bed, their children sleeping peacefully in their rooms, he pulled her close. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" Verna asked, nestling into his embrace. "For being the beginning of healing I didn't know I needed," he replied. "For giving me a family when I'd lost my own. For loving me despite how we began." Verna pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Our beginning may have been unusual, but it led us here. And there's nowhere else I'd rather be." 10 years later, the valley that had once held only Jackson's lonely homestead had blossomed into a small but thriving community. A proper town had formed nearby, with a general store, a church, and the school that had grown from Verna's humble beginnings. Children played in yards where once only wild grasses grew. Neighbors gathered for barn raisings and harvest festivals, sharing the work and rewards of frontier life. The Zimmerman Ranch stood at the heart of it all, a testament to what could be built from determination and love. Jackson, now with silver threading his dark hair, had become a respected figure in the county, known for his fair dealings and generous spirit. Verna's school had educated 2 generations of children, some of whom had gone on to universities back east. On the 20th anniversary of the day, Jackson had emptied his pockets to buy 5 sisters at an illegal auction. The family gathered for a celebration. Ruth and Bethany traveled from Denver with their families. Margaret returned from medical school in Philadelphia, where she was one of the few women in her class. Sarah and her husband came from their nearby ranch with their 3 children. As twilight fell, they lit lanterns in the orchard where so many family milestones had been celebrated. William, now a handsome young man of 19, played the fiddle while the twins, Anna and Mary, danced with their younger brothers, James and Robert. Elizabeth and her family had made the journey from Texas, completing the circle. Jackson found Verna standing apart from the celebration, watching their extended family with shining eyes. He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Zimmerman?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how far we've come," she replied, leaning into him. Do you remember that first night in the cave during the flood, when you told me family is everything? Jackson nodded, his eyes following William as he taught his youngest brother to dance. I meant it then, I mean it even more now. You created this, Jackson, Verna said softly, all of it, when you couldn't bear to see sisters separated. He shook his head, turning her to face him. We created it together, Verna. Every day since you chose to stay, we've built this life brick by brick, memory by memory. His thumb brushed over the silver locket she still wore, now containing miniature portraits of their children. I may have emptied my pockets that day in Durango, but what I received in return has filled my heart beyond measure. As the music swelled, and their family called for them to join the dancing, Verna and Jackson moved into the circle of light. Among the faces they loved most in the world, they danced under the stars, their story which had begun in desperation and fear continuing to unfold in joy, hope, and abiding love. The legacy of the Harper sisters and the cowboy who couldn't bear to see them, separated, lived on in their children and their children's children. The valley that had once witnessed a desperate escape became the birthplace of generations who grew up knowing they were cherished, protected, and free to choose their own paths. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and the house had settled into slumber, Verna would sometimes find Jackson on the porch, gazing at the stars. She would sit beside him, their hands finding each other as naturally as breathing. And together, they would marvel at the fullness of their lives, a fullness that had begun the day a lone cowboy emptied his pockets for 5 sisters who needed saving, never imagining that in saving them, he was saving himself as well.